It was about 2:30 in the morning. Me and Vanessa had just left one of her girlfriend's anniversary party. The following day was Father's Day, and instead of coming back to my place like usual, my girlfriend was headed home so her and her father could go to breakfast in the morning. But before we drove into our neighborhood, Vanessa suggested we go hang out in the nearby park for a little while. She wasn't ready for our night to end yet, and we were both still amped up from all our dancing and karaoke. As expected, the park was empty. I drove along the winding path until we got to the base of a small hill that overlooked the river. Steps trailed up the hill leading to a platform with a bench covered by a stone gazebo. We walked the stairs and sat on the bench arm in arm looking at the rushing water down below. Vanessa put her head on my shoulder and started talking. What about I don't recall? What happened next must have taken precedence in my memory bank. We were chatting away when I started hearing footsteps over gravel back toward where I had parked. Being as dark as it was, I stood up and walked to the edge of the platform to get a better view. I could make out a shadow of a person walking around my car. Vanessa followed me over to the stairs. I told her to crouch behind me as I pulled my pistol from the holster. I didn't know what was about to happen, but I liked being the proactive type. I called out and asked what the person was doing. Their silhouette went from peeking into my car to turning toward me, and they started walking. I left my firearm hanging by my side, but I clicked the safety off. Even though 40 yards away, I was hoping the stranger heard that sound through the night stillness. The figure walked into a sliver of light as they got closer to the bottom of the steps. I saw a middle-aged man wearing a black suit and matching fedora. I called out to him again and asked him if he needed help. He paused at the bottom of the steps. He looked up at me and said his wife had lost her pocketbook and he was just helping her look for it. Then he looked around at the surrounding woods. I looked around too. He seemed to be alone. There wasn't even another car in sight. I asked him if his wife thought she left her things in my car. I knew my comment came off highly sarcastic, but I didn't care. He had given me such a weak explanation for being caught leering into my car. His face seemed to harden, and he didn't respond to the question. Instead, he grabbed a hold of the railing and started to make his way up the steps. I objected, telling him I felt more comfortable with him staying where he was, but he didn't listen. I looked back at Vanessa. She was still crouching, eyes closed, with her fingers plugging her ears. I turned and faced the man again. He was almost 3/4 of the way up already. I raised my arm and pointed my gun down the steps, aimed right at his hat. Once again, I told him he was making me uncomfortable. He looked up at the gun and grimaced as if he was disappointed. He slowly raised his free hand and started backpedaling down the stairs. I watched until he got back to ground level and then looked back at Vanessa again. When I did, I heard the man take off running. I looked back in his direction and saw a shadowy blur sprinting toward a thick sea of trees, and just as quick as he appeared, the man vanished into the forest. I grabbed my girlfriend's hand and rushed back to my car. I was curious about where the man had ran off to. There was nothing in that direction except acres and acres of jungle. I followed the road leading outside of the park and started to circle the outside. Vanessa wanted to call the police. I told her she was overreacting. We drove around for 10 minutes before I decided to give up. We didn't see anyone. I pulled in front of Vanessa's apartment and gave her a kiss goodnight. I watched until she stepped inside and then drove away to head back to my place. I decided to drive back through the park on my way home. I didn't know what I would have done if I saw the man again. I just knew I had come close to shooting someone, and part of me wondered if they were just a weirdo really out there looking for their wife's purse. My second time around the park proved fruitless too. I was ready to call it a night, and if I didn't text Vanessa and let her know I was home safe soon, she was going to start her panicking again. I hit the road on the edge of the park that would take me back to my neighborhood. As I rounded the first bend, I immediately had to slam on my brakes due to an animal just standing out in the middle of the street. It was a wolf, the first one I had ever seen up close. It had his back to me. The beast turned his head around and looked at me. I beat my horn. It turned his body fully around and just stared at me. I beeped again, but it didn't move. I put my car in reverse and cleared enough room to go around the animal. As I slowly drove by, the wolf stared back and followed my face with his. And as crazy as it sounds, I'm sure it winked at me. I began regaining speed, dividing my attention between the road ahead and my rearview mirror. The wolf had turned his body back around and was just watching me drive away. Right before I drove around the next curve, I looked back one last time. I saw a human-like shadow emerge from the forest and stand next to the wolf in the street. A second later, they were out of view. I never saw that man again, but I sure heard about him a lot more after that. Apparently, I was the first person in town to see him, but definitely not the last. Before long, stories started circulating all around about the decked-out stranger wandering around our park. In most of the instances, people say they see him just leaning against a tree on the side of a road as they drive through at night, though no one person has ever seen him more than once, and no one else has seen the wolf either. We don't know who he is, but people who've gotten looks at him in better light and say his suit and shoes look expensive. Because of that, we nicknamed him Rich Ghost. Unlike Vanessa, I was never creeped out by what happened. I actually think it's kind of epic. I'm the only person I know who was involved in the creation of a new urban legend. I just hope our residents don't start disappearing.